Have you ever watched a multi-billion-dollar tech empire collapse just because a terrible boss fired the only person keeping the power grids from literally catching fire? Welcome to Austin, Texas, where the egos of executives in expensive wool suits are inversely proportional to their actual intelligence. Buckle up for a wild ride. This is not your standard corporate revenge tale. It is a nuclear blast, calculated down to the exact millisecond. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now, let's begin the story. My name is Lucy Martin. I am 34 years old, and until a remarkably crisp Monday morning, I was the lead systems architect for the smart grid platform at AuraGrid Innovations. If you do not know AuraGrid, just picture a shiny corporate shell wrapped around a highly volatile, massively complex electrical infrastructure that powers half of Texas. I built the brain of that infrastructure. I spent 4 years mapping every physical limitation, every thermal boundary, and every unpredictable surge that a Texas heatwave could throw at our aging electrical equipment. It was exactly 8:15 in the morning when I was summoned to the grand boardroom. The executive suite was a ridiculous glass box perched on the 40th floor, designed specifically to make the people inside feel like gods looking down on the helpless ants below. Waiting for me inside was Julian. Julian was our brand new chief executive officer, freshly parachuted in from a Silicon Valley venture capital firm. He was a man who wore $3,000 tailored wool suits in the middle of a blazing southern summer and used words like synergy, disruption, and paradigm shift without a single trace of irony. He possessed the kind of unearned confidence that only comes from a lifetime of failing upward. I walked in carrying my coffee and my heavily stickered workstation laptop. Sitting around the massive mahogany table were 6 board members, all trying very hard to avoid making eye contact with me. Julian stood at the head of the table, projecting a perfectly practiced smile that did not quite reach his cold, dead eyes. "Lucy, please take a seat," Julian commanded, gesturing vaguely with a platinum pen. "We are restructuring, AuraGrid is moving into the future, and frankly, your load routing algorithms are obsolete. They are bulky, overly cautious, and quite frankly, a massive financial drag on our operational efficiency." I stared at him, letting the sheer stupidity of his statement hang in the crisp, air-conditioned room. "My algorithms are the only reason half of Austin does not lose power when everyone turns on their air conditioning at exactly 5 o'clock in the afternoon," I replied, keeping my voice entirely level. "They are bulky because physics is bulky. They account for thermal expansion, line sag, and transformer coolant temperatures." Julian chuckled, a patronizing sound that made my teeth grind together. "We are replacing your legacy code with a next generation, cloud-based automated artificial intelligence. It is sleek, it is highly cost-effective, and most importantly, it does not require a lead architect pulling a high 6-figure salary to constantly babysit it. You are terminated, effective immediately." He was not just firing me. He was replacing a highly tuned, physics-constrained routing system with a cheap, off-the-shelf software gimmick that had zero understanding of actual electrical engineering. "Julian," I said, leaning forward and resting my hands on the cool mahogany wood, "the Texas weather is not a virtual software simulation. When the heat spikes, those physical transformers expand. My code is the only failsafe preventing the substations from literally overloading and blowing up. If you remove those physical constraints and let a hallucinating artificial intelligence push unlimited power, you are going to burn the grid to the ground." Julian rolled his eyes, his smugness radiating like toxic waste. "Always the drama with you engineers. That is just the desperate scare tactic of a has-been trying to protect her job. We are done here. Lucy, security will escort you out. Hand over the laptop." A burly security guard stepped forward from the corner of the room, looking incredibly uncomfortable. I did not fight it. I simply slid the heavy machine across the polished table. Julian, desperate to prove his absolute dominance in front of the silent board of directors, grabbed my laptop. "I will be revoking your administrative privileges personally, right here, right now, just to ensure a seamless transition." He grabbed a high-definition display cable from the center console and jammed it into the side of my machine. Instantly, the massive projector screen covering the entire back wall of the boardroom flared to life, mirroring my desktop for everyone in the room to see. He grabbed his wireless mouse to navigate to the administrative panel, but before his cursor could even reach the start menu, a high-priority notification banner dropped down from the top right corner of the projected screen. It was bright red, flagged as urgent, and the sender was the office of the mayor of Chicago. Because the screen was over 100 inches wide. The preview text was perfectly legible to every single person sitting at the table. It read, "Urgent offer, Director of Energy Architecture, $750,000 base salary, 2.5% equity up front. We desperately need you. Lucy, please say yes." The entire boardroom froze. The silence was so absolute, you could hear the subtle hum of the overhead vents. Julian stopped breathing, his hand hovering uselessly over his expensive ergonomic mouse. His smug expression dissolved into a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. The board members leaned forward, their mouths slightly open, eyes wide enough to fall out of their skulls. I did not miss a beat. I calmly stood up, walked over to Julian, and gently moved his frozen hand off the mouse. With the entire room watching the massive screen, I navigated the cursor over the notification, opened the email, and boldly clicked Accept. "Well," I said, my voice echoing clearly in the deafening silence, "it looks like my obsolescence is in very high demand." I reached into my pocket, unclipped my Aura Grid employee identification badge, and tossed it onto the table. It landed with a sharp, satisfying clack right in front of Julian. I turned toward the glass doors, but paused just before exiting. I looked back at the new chief executive officer, who was still staring blankly at the giant screen displaying my new, life-changing job offer. "Oh, and Julian," I said, offering him one final polite smile. "Before I leave, I highly recommend you go out and buy a personal diesel generator. You are going to need it very soon." With that, I pushed open the heavy glass doors and walked away, leaving the executives locked inside their shiny little box, blissfully unaware that they had just lit the fuse on their own destruction. 2 weeks later, the oppressive humidity of the South was entirely replaced by the sharp, brisk winds rolling off Lake Michigan. My arrival at TerraVolt was the exact opposite of my departure from my previous employer. I was greeted by an expansive laboratory floor and a senior leadership team that actually understood the laws of thermodynamics. They gave me everything I asked for. I was handed a dedicated task force of 40 brilliant engineers and a research and development budget so massive it felt like a blank check. We immediately began tearing down old paradigms, building a completely new standard for an integrated, weather-resilient electrical grid. We were not just patching old holes. We were designing a decentralized architecture that could isolate and survive catastrophic failures. It was deliberate, precise work. While we were meticulously testing load capacities in a state-of-the-art simulation environment, 1,000 miles away, the great technological revolution was officially rolling out. Julian had proudly flipped the switch on his highly touted automated management system. I knew exactly when he did it, because in the utility industry, the infrastructure always talks. The physical hardware whispers its complaints to anyone who actually knows how to listen. Almost immediately, the minor voltage fluctuations began. They were small, almost imperceptible hiccups rippling through the distribution networks. In a proper control room, these tiny anomalies would trigger urgent warning flags. But the shiny new software was designed to prioritize executive summaries over diagnostic realities. The algorithm was busy smoothing out the data, presenting a beautiful, perfectly efficient dashboard of rising profits to the board of directors, while completely blinding them to the physical groans of the stressed ceramic insulators. The real motive behind this reckless software deployment remained hidden until late one Tuesday evening. My personal phone vibrated on my desk. It was an encrypted, self-destructing message sent through a secure channel. The sender was Marcus, a brilliant senior field technician I had mentored for years, who was still trapped in the trenches back down south. He sold the ghost nodes. The encrypted text read, "The entire system is running completely blind." The puzzle pieces snapped together with terrifying clarity. Julian had not just bought cheap software. He had covertly bypassed the regulatory committees and signed a massive, off-the-books contract with a colossal cryptocurrency mining consortium. He had granted this sprawling, secretive data center an unprecedented priority access tier, a guarantee of unlimited, unthrottled power supply, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. In exchange for selling out the safety margin of the residential grid, Julian had personally pocketed a commission well into the mid-seven figures. It was a recipe for absolute devastation. Cryptocurrency mining farms do not operate like normal businesses. They do not turn off their lights at night. They demand a continuous, brutal, and completely unrelenting tidal wave of electrical current. And this was the fatal flaw hidden deep inside the new management system. The artificial intelligence only understood digital demand and financial priority. It lacked any basic comprehension of physical reality. When the crypto farms sent a digital request for maximum electrical draw, the algorithm looked at the priority contract and gladly opened the floodgates. The software simply did not know that a massive physical substation, built over 3 decades ago, can only handle so much thermal stress before the industrial cooling oil inside the steel tanks literally begins to boil. As if nature itself decided to test this catastrophic setup. A record-breaking, unseasonal early summer heat wave slammed into the state. A suffocating high-pressure dome parked itself directly over the southern plains, trapping blistering heat that baked the concrete. Every single air conditioning unit in a 50-mile radius kicked on simultaneously, screaming for relief from the 100-degree temperatures. Back in my pristine corner office in Chicago, the climate control was set to a perfectly comfortable 70 degrees. I leaned back in my leather chair, bringing a ceramic mug of dark, bitter black coffee to my lips. With my free hand, I slowly dragged my mouse across the desk and clicked open a secondary monitor. I logged into the publicly available transmission line thermal monitoring map for my old district. Watching it happen felt exactly like standing on a quiet beach, knowing a massive tidal wave is already racing toward the shore. It was a slow, hypnotic, and utterly unstoppable disaster. The digital lines on the screen, representing the massive transmission corridors, were supposed to be a cool, stable green, but as I watched, the color began to shift. The green bled into a sickly yellow, then mutated into a warning orange. Slowly, inevitably, the main artery supplying the southern sectors turned a deep, angry, pulsating crimson. It was the silent, desperate scream of overloaded transformers begging for a break that the automated system would never give them. I took a slow, measured sip of my hot coffee. My eyes locked on the bleeding red map. The ticking time bomb had officially started its final countdown, and there was absolutely no one left in the building who knew how to defuse it. By late Thursday afternoon, the voltage drops were no longer just theoretical anomalies on a screen. The residential sectors were the first to feel it. Lights flickered in living rooms, industrial refrigeration units in local grocery stores stalled, and sensitive medical equipment at neighborhood clinics began to trigger low-power alarms. The customer service lines at Oragrid were instantly flooded with tens of thousands of furious callers. In the executive suite, absolute panic set in. Julian, realizing his flawless automated future was rapidly turning into a public relations nightmare, did exactly what every incompetent executive does when backed into a corner. He called the corporate lawyers. Less than 2 hours after the first major rolling blackout hit the suburbs, a heavily encrypted, legally binding document landed in my new corporate inbox. The subject line was written in aggressive, capitalized letters, declaring a formal notice of cease, desist, and impending litigation. It was a masterpiece of corporate bullying. Julian had instructed his legal team to accuse me of deliberate corporate sabotage, malicious compliance, and the outright theft of proprietary source code. The language was drenched in arrogance, asserting that I had intentionally installed a hidden kill switch in the routing algorithms before my departure to hold the company hostage. The legal demand was crystal clear, and frankly, hilarious. The letter mandated that I had exactly 12 hours to surrender the alleged hidden patch codes that they believed I was maliciously hiding. If I failed to comply, they threatened to involve federal authorities, press criminal charges for cyber terrorism, and seek financial damages that would bankrupt me for 10 lifetimes. They honestly believed that their new, highly expensive artificial intelligence was failing simply because I was withholding a magic piece of software. I read the entire document twice, a slow, cold smile creeping across my face. I did not call my own legal team. I did not panic. Instead, I opened a blank email, cracked my knuckles, and began to draft a response that was meticulously designed to systematically dismantle every single threat they had just made. I kept my tone absolutely freezing, devoid of any emotion, relying purely on razor-sharp logic and undeniable legal facts. I was about to leave them with absolutely zero room to breathe. To the legal representatives of AuraGrid Innovations, and specifically to Julian, I began, I acknowledge the receipt of your hollow threats. However, I must draw your attention to the attached document. I attached a high-resolution scanned copy of the exact termination paperwork Julian had practically thrown at me in the boardroom. Please note the specific phrasing on page 2, paragraph 3, where your chief executive officer explicitly terminated my employment without cause, effective immediately, while simultaneously escorting me off the premises under guard. I continued, typing with deliberate, heavy keystrokes. As any competent attorney in your department should have advised you, executing an immediate hostile termination without cause instantly and irrevocably nullifies any post-employment support obligations, non-compete clauses, and ongoing technical advisory agreements. You severed the contract. Therefore, I owe you absolutely nothing. I do not work for you, and I am entirely immune to your internal operational failures. Then came the technical execution. I wanted them to understand exactly how stupid they were. Furthermore, your system is not failing because of a missing patch code or an imaginary kill switch. Software cannot fix a missing hardware problem. Your highly touted artificial intelligence load balancer is currently attempting to route massive amounts of high-voltage electricity completely blind. It is failing because it lacks synchronization from the physical thermal sensors on the distribution lines. I paused, savoring the next sentence before typing it. If you want to know why those sensors are no longer communicating with the main hub, I suggest you review Julian's executive order from last month. He specifically mandated the physical removal of the external relay sensors on the primary substations because he claimed the wiring arrays looked cluttered and ruined the aesthetic appeal of the facility. You ripped out the nervous system of the grid because you did not like how it looked. The artificial intelligence is not broken. It is just blind, and it is currently guessing how much power a melting copper wire can handle. I concluded the email with the final nail in the coffin. Since I am no longer an employee, any assistance I provide must be contracted under my independent advisory rates. Attached is my formal quote for emergency crisis mitigation. My fee is $3 million. This amount is required entirely up front, in cash, wired directly to my holding account. This price is strictly non-negotiable. You have exactly 24 hours to transfer the funds and sign the retainer. If the deadline passes, the fee will automatically double to $6 million. Choose wisely. I clicked send and leaned back in my chair. I did not have cameras in Julian's office, but my former colleagues later confirmed exactly what happened next. Less than 5 minutes after my email bypassed the executive secretary and landed directly on his screen. Julian read the response. The sheer humiliation, combined with the realization that his own vanity had caused the disaster, finally broke him. In a fit of uncontrollable, screaming rage, he picked up a heavy crystal paperweight from his mahogany desk and hurled it directly into his curved, ultra-wide computer monitor, shattering the screen into 1,000 worthless pieces. By Friday afternoon, the atmosphere over Texas felt less like a weather system and more like an active blast furnace. The temperature gauge officially crossed 105 degrees Fahrenheit. The air was entirely motionless, thick, and suffocating. Down in the valleys and across the sprawling suburbs, millions of air conditioning units roared in unison, desperate to push back against the brutal, unrelenting heat. But that immense residential demand was absolutely nothing compared to the monstrous, parasitic hunger of the secret cryptocurrency data center. The massive server farm was operating at maximum capacity, chewing through gigawatts of electricity to mine digital coins, completely insulated by Julian's unbreakable priority contract. Inside AuraGrid's shiny new artificial intelligence core, a catastrophic logical panic was unfolding in real time. The software was trapped in an impossible, fatal paradox. It was strictly programmed to blindly honor the unlimited power mandate for the cryptocurrency farm, but the incoming residential demand from the sweltering cities was spiking off the charts. The algorithms scrambled frantically, trying to balance the equations without any input from the physical thermal sensors that Julian had ordered removed. Bereft of physical reality and unable to calculate the actual temperature of the hardware, the system made the absolute worst possible decision. It defaulted to a brute force solution. It completely opened every single digital transmission valve, commanding the infrastructure to push maximum, unthrottled voltage through the aging copper arteries. The physical infrastructure could not take it. At exactly 2:14 in the afternoon, the real world violently rejected the software's commands. In the industrial sector of South Austin, a cluster of 3 massive, high-capacity substations took the full, devastating brunt of the artificial intelligence's fatal error. Inside the towering gray transformers, the heavy industrial cooling oil began to boil. The immense thermal pressure built up inside the steel containment vessels with terrifying speed. With a deafening, earth-shattering roar, the first substation violently detonated. A blinding flash of blue and white plasma lit up the afternoon sky, followed instantly by a towering pillar of thick black smoke and furious orange flames. Less than 3 seconds later, the second substation exploded, then the third. The concussions were so incredibly powerful they shattered windows in nearby office buildings, shook the foundations of nearby homes, and set off car alarms for dozens of blocks. This was not a localized outage. It was the genesis of a catastrophic cascading failure. When the South Austin grid collapsed, the sheer volume of displaced electrical current violently backwashed into the neighboring sectors. Protective relays in other cities desperately tried to trip their breakers to save themselves. But the artificial intelligence, still wildly hallucinating and trying to fulfill the cryptocurrency contract, kept aggressively forcing the connections back open. The power grid collapsed like a massive line of dominoes. The blackout swept outward from Austin with terrifying speed, plunging half the entire state into absolute darkness. The chaos was instantaneous and absolute. Without power, the intricate, delicate ballet of modern civilization instantly dissolved into terrifying anarchy. Traffic lights at major, multi-lane intersections went completely black, resulting in thousands of severe vehicle collisions within the first 20 minutes. The Austin International Airport lost all primary radar and communication, forcing air traffic controllers to frantically reroute dozens of incoming commercial flights using only battery-powered emergency radios, while passengers panicked in the pitch-black terminals. Inside the major metropolitan hospitals, the lights flickered and died. Emergency backup generators violently kicked on, but many of them were severely outdated and quickly began to overheat under the crushing load of trying to power entire intensive care units, life support ventilators, and active surgical theaters. The fragile, invisible thread keeping millions of people safe was snapping in real time. As the physical world burned, the digital world exploded with unprecedented fury. Social media platforms were instantly overwhelmed by millions of furious, terrified residents. Hashtags demanding immediate answers, predicting a societal collapse. And cursing Aura Grid trended globally within minutes. People were trapped in sweltering elevators, gridlocked on baking highways, and suffocating in their dark, unventilated apartments. The financial markets reacted with the ruthless, bloody efficiency of a guillotine. The exact moment the catastrophic scale of the blackout became apparent to Wall Street, the market turned on Aura Grid with apocalyptic ferocity. Massive institutional investors initiated a total panicked liquidation of their portfolios. The stock chart did not just drop, it plummeted in a straight, terrifying vertical line. Trillions of bytes of trading data executed in mere seconds, erasing billions of dollars of market capitalization. In under 2 hours of frantic, bloodthirsty trading, Aura Grid stock crashed straight through the floor, plummeting from a blue-chip technology darling to absolute, unrecoverable junk status. The company was financially bleeding to death on the public stage. Back in the executive suite, the climate control had completely died, and the emergency backup lights cast a sickly pale yellow glow over the mahogany boardroom. Julian was drenched in cold sweat, his breathing shallow and rapid. His expensive tailored wool suit lay discarded in a crumpled heap on the floor. His pristine, untouchable image was completely shattered. He was desperately pacing the room, shouting into a bulky, battery-powered satellite phone, frantically calling every elite disaster recovery and cybersecurity firm in the United States. He offered them blank checks, tens of millions of dollars in emergency consulting fees, practically sobbing as he begged them to send a team to fix the collapsing grid. Every single firm gave him the exact same answer. They flatly and completely refused. They knew the reputation of the new Aura Grid system. They knew Julian had fired the only architect who understood the underlying framework. "We are not touching that radioactive waste," the senior partner of a top-tier firm in New York told him coldly over the static-filled line. "Your system is a tangled, undocumented disaster. Without the original source blueprints and the physical sensor maps, plugging our people into that mess is professional suicide. You burned the maps. Julian, you are entirely on your own," Julian screamed, hurling the heavy satellite phone against the reinforced glass wall. The final, devastating blow came at exactly 5 o'clock. The governor of Texas appeared on a live, internationally broadcast television feed from a secure, subterranean emergency bunker in the state capitol. His face was stone cold, radiating absolute, uncompromising fury. "As of this moment, I am declaring a state of disaster for the entire southern and central regions of Texas," the governor announced, his voice echoing across millions of battery-powered radios and emergency cellular streams. "What we are witnessing today is not a natural disaster. It is a man-made catastrophe born from gross corporate negligence and rampant greed. Therefore, I have officially requested the Federal Bureau of Investigation, in conjunction with the National Energy Commission, to immediately launch a full-scale criminal investigation into the board of directors and the executive leadership of Aura Grid Innovations. They will be held fully accountable for every single life endangered today." Julian collapsed into a leather chair in the sweltering, suffocating darkness of his office, listening to the broadcast on a dying laptop battery. The trap had fully snapped shut, and there was absolutely no way out. By 8 o'clock that evening, the Aura Grid executive boardroom had transformed from a symbol of corporate dominance into a sweaty, suffocating bunker. The building's emergency generators were barely keeping the backup lights and the primary communication screens alive. The air conditioning was completely dead, leaving the room smelling of stale sweat and sheer, unadulterated panic. The board of directors, along with the top 3 institutional investors who had dialed in via secure audio links, sat around the massive mahogany table like condemned prisoners awaiting their execution. Every single minute that ticked by represented hundreds of millions of dollars evaporating into thin air. Julian stood at the head of the table. He looked nothing like the polished, arrogant venture capitalist who had smugly fired me just weeks ago. His hair was disheveled, his eyes were bloodshot, and he was physically trembling. He was cornered, facing the very real prospect of federal prison, and like a rat trapped in a sinking ship, he resorted to the most desperate, pathetic tactic available. He decided to put on a theatrical performance. "We are the victims here," Julian pleaded, his voice cracking with manufactured emotion. He actually managed to squeeze out a single, fake tear that rolled down his cheek. "I did everything by the book. The new artificial intelligence was flawless, but we were sabotaged. Lucy Martin is not just a disgruntled former employee, she is a domestic technology terrorist. She intentionally booby-trapped the load-routing architecture before she left. She planted hidden malware to bypass the fail-safes, waiting for the perfect moment to cripple this company and extort us for millions. This is a coordinated cyber attack, and we need to push the narrative that we are the targets of corporate espionage." He was leaning over the table, desperately scanning the faces of the board members, begging them to buy his ridiculous fiction. He was so busy trying to save his own skin that he completely failed to notice the subtle shift in the room's dynamics. "That is quite a compelling story," Julian, a deep, weary voice, interrupted. It was the chairman of the board, a ruthlessly pragmatic billionaire who was currently watching his net worth bleed out on national television. "Unfortunately, we are no longer interested in your stories. We are interested in surviving the night." The chairman pressed a button on his console. Instantly, the massive projector screen at the back of the room, the very same screen Julian had used to try and humiliate me, flickered to life and split into two distinct frames. On the left side was the terrifying live news feed of the fires in South Austin. On the right side, in crisp, high-definition video, was me. I was sitting comfortably in my Chicago office at TerraVolt, wearing a sharp, tailored blazer, holding a pen, and looking perfectly relaxed. Julian gasped, stumbling backward as if he had just seen a ghost. "What is she doing here? Cut the feed. She is the enemy." "Sit down and shut up, Julian," the chairman snapped, his voice cracking like a whip. "I secretly reached out to TerraVolt 3 hours ago. I formally requested an independent, third-party damage valuation to prepare for the impending federal investigation. TerraVolt graciously agreed to provide their top energy architect to assess our internal systems. They sent Lucy." I smiled into the camera. "Good evening, gentlemen. It is a pleasure to see you all again under such illuminating circumstances." Julian was hyperventilating now, clawing at his collar. "Do not listen to her. She is trying to ruin us." "You managed to do that perfectly well on your own, Julian," I said smoothly, dropping the pleasantries. "Let us skip the amateur dramatics and look at the actual forensic data. Shall we?" With a single click of my mouse, my video feed minimized, and I broadcast a highly classified, heavily encrypted financial contract directly onto their boardroom screen. I had easily pulled it from the server logs before Julian's panicked technical team even thought to scrub the system. "What you are looking at, gentlemen," I explained, my voice cutting through the heavy, sweltering air of the boardroom, "is a Tier 1, unrestricted power priority agreement. It was signed exactly 18 days ago by your chief executive officer. It legally guarantees a continuous, unthrottled draw of 300 megawatts of electricity to a shell corporation managing a massive cryptocurrency mining facility." The board members leaned in, their faces turning pale as they read the damning clauses highlighted in bright yellow. "Julian did not just authorize this contract," I continued relentlessly. "He actively commanded the engineering team to physically detach the thermal warning sensors on the southern substations because the safety alerts were preventing his crypto client from pulling their maximum power. And if you look at page 4, paragraph 2, you will see the exact routing number for an offshore holding account in the Cayman Islands. That account received a signing bonus of exactly $4.5 million, paid directly to Julian, the very same day the contract was finalized." The silence in the boardroom was absolute and terrifying. It was the sound of a dozen extremely powerful, extremely angry people simultaneously realizing they had been used, lied to, and pushed to the brink of federal indictment by the man standing in front of them. Julian was completely paralyzed. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The fake tears were gone, replaced by the horrifying realization that his life was completely over. The chairman stood up slowly. He did not yell. He did not throw anything. His voice was terrifyingly calm. Julian, you are relieved of your duties. Effective this exact second. You do not get severance. You do not get legal representation from this firm. Security is waiting outside the door to escort you directly to the authorities. Get out of my sight before I physically throw you through that window. 2 massive security guards, the exact same guards Julian had used to intimidate me weeks earlier, stepped into the room, grabbed him roughly by the arms, and dragged him out into the dark hallway. He did not even fight back. He was a hollow shell. The chairman took a deep, shaky breath, wiping the sweat from his forehead with a silk handkerchief. He turned his attention back to the screen, looking directly at me. The arrogant billionaire was entirely gone. In his place was a desperate, cornered man begging for his life. "Lucy," the chairman pleaded, his voice stripped of all its former pride. "You know this infrastructure better than anyone on the planet. The federal government is going to fine us billions. The state is threatening to seize our assets by morning. We will pay your $3 million consulting fee. We will pay $5 million. Just, please, tell us you can remote into the system and shut those valves down before the rest of the state burns." I looked at the chairman. His face was a portrait of total defeat. The men in that room were used to buying their way out of consequences, throwing cash at problems until they disappeared. But physics does not accept bribes, and neither do I. I let a slow, icy smile touch my lips. $5 million, Chairman. I think you misunderstand the fundamental nature of this conversation. I am not a freelance technology consultant, and I do not retail salvation. You cannot buy a temporary patch for a ship that has already sunk. The boardroom erupted in panicked murmurs. The chairman held up a trembling hand to silence them. "What do you want?" "Lucy, name your price." "My price is absolute," I replied, my voice steady and echoing clearly through the dark, sweltering room in Austin. TerraVolt is prepared to immediately acquire the entirety of AuraGrid's physical grid infrastructure, all transmission rights, and all operational licenses. We will absorb your catastrophic liabilities. We will deal with the federal regulators, and we will fix the grid. In exchange, we are purchasing your assets for exactly 10% of your current market valuation. That is a 90% discount, a fire sale, quite literally. The collective gasp from the executives was audible through the speakers. A board member slammed his fist onto the mahogany table. 10%! That is outright extortion. That is pennies on the dollar. We will be ruined. "You are already ruined," I countered flawlessly, leaning forward into the camera. "Your stock is worthless. In approximately 2 hours, the governor of Texas is going to authorize the National Guard to seize your remaining facilities under emergency disaster protocols. Tomorrow morning, the Department of Justice will freeze every single one of your corporate bank accounts. You can either sign this company over to TerraVolt right now and walk away with a tiny fraction of your wealth, or you can stubbornly hold on to a pile of ashes from inside a federal prison cell. I have already drafted the digital acquisition papers. They are sitting in your inbox. You have exactly 60 seconds to decide." There was no debate. There was no counteroffer. When the terrifying reality of federal prisons stares down a room full of arrogant billionaires, their pride evaporates instantly. With heavy, defeated sighs, the executives opened their laptops, one by one. Under the pale glow of emergency lighting, they applied their digital signatures. The chairman was the last. He stared at the camera with hollow, empty eyes, tapped his screen, and officially surrendered the empire. "Signatures confirmed," I stated, watching the green check marks light up my secondary monitor. "The asset transfer is complete. AuraGrid infrastructure now officially belongs to TerraVolt." "Now fix it," the chairman yelled, his voice cracking with absolute desperation. "You promised you could fix it." I did not say a word. I simply pulled my keyboard slightly closer. Exactly 30 seconds after the final signature was validated, I opened a hidden command terminal. I did not need to write a complex new algorithm. I did not need to fight Julian's malfunctioning artificial intelligence. I just typed a single, simple, 8-character sequence and hit the Enter key. 4 years ago, while I was building the foundation of the Aura Grid system, I knew the executives would eventually try to cut corners to save money. So, I secretly hardwired a stealth physical safety valve protocol directly into the deepest firmware of the grid relays. It was a fail-safe that no software, no artificial intelligence, and no executive order could ever overwrite. The moment I hit enter, that dormant protocol woke up. It instantly severed the digital connection to Julian's artificial intelligence, blinding it completely. Then, it initiated a massive, physical hard reset across the entire state. It automatically bypassed the burning substations in the south, completely severed the unlimited power feed to the parasitic cryptocurrency data center, and smoothly rerouted the remaining stable electricity through the auxiliary transmission lines. Down in Austin, the results were instantaneous. Streetlights that had been dead for hours suddenly flickered and blazed back to life. The massive backup generators at the metropolitan hospitals powered down as primary voltage flooded back into the surgical wings. The comforting hum of millions of air conditioners slowly returned to the sweltering residential neighborhoods. The blackout was officially over. The great truth of my revenge was that the system was never truly doomed. I never left them without a lifeline. I simply took away their ability to control the machinery, forcing them to sell the entire kingdom to me just to get their hands on the only key. Later that same evening, the flashing red and blue lights of federal vehicles illuminated the long, manicured driveway of Julian's sprawling estate. Agents in tactical gear escorted him out the front door in heavy steel handcuffs. His tailored suit was wrinkled, and his head hung low in absolute disgrace as they read him his charges for commercial fraud, gross negligence, and endangering national security. There would be no golden parachute for him, only concrete walls. I stood up from my desk and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office on the 50th floor in Chicago. I looked out over the sprawling, magnificent grid of city lights stretching out into the dark horizon, knowing that down south, millions of lights were shining again because of my design. The corporate world is full of empty suits who believe they are masters of the universe simply because they know how to read a financial spreadsheet, but they always forget the most fundamental rule of power. Never call an architect obsolete when you are still living in the building they built with their own two hands. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Boss Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.